I gave you guys a clue whenever I titled this about developing presence and emotionless correction. And if any of you have taken any of Brian Hill's classes, especially deliberate coaching, you've heard about emotionless correction, which we're going to go into. But the first thing I want to talk about here is, have you guys shout out in the comments if you've purchased this book yet? It's called The Inner Game of Tennis. Tim Heron referred to it in the last live, I think it was 2 weeks ago when I had him on. I think there's been about 3 or 4 people that have brought this book to my attention, including Active Self-Protection as one of the suggested readings for that instructor cohort. So I went ahead and cracked it open. I'm not even, I'm close to halfway through it maybe, so I still have a lot to learn there. But wow, it's a lot to take in, but it's all really good. So I wanted to pick your brain on a few of the concepts in that book and lead into perhaps the emotionless correction side of it. But in the beginning of the book, they talk a lot about presence and how one can become more present in their shooting and in their training. So and I noticed that there's an overlap between those concepts and what you teach as well. So I thought it might be interesting to go over that. But the two concepts I wanted to specifically talk about are quieting yourself, quieting your mind, I assume is what they're talking about, quieting your mind and trusting yourself. Those two concepts. And so do you believe that those two concepts are key to mastering high performance on any level? And why do you think, or do you think that people struggle with those so much?
Absolutely. This was the first coaching book that I ever read that I can remember as a martial artist. And it taught me, number one, to trust myself. So we'll address that. Uh, Trust is the intuitive mechanism of the brain. It recognizes patterns, it is predictive by nature, and it's very fast. And it can do things we simply can't do through logic. And the problem that I find with most people trying to perform level at a high level is they're trying to do it as a checklist. I do this, and then I quiet my mind and then I shoot. But the real problem is this: you can't quiet your mind because you're not one individual up there. You're a multiplicity. There's many voices in your mind and are all actively shouting at one time, much like a preschool, you know, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. And
Mhm.
whichever one you do pay attention to is the outcome that you're doing. So the trust part of this is to learn how to program yourself effectively. And that requires experimentation. If we learn the proper process of programming and then we let go and simply trust ourselves, that allows us to perform at a much higher level than we've ever done before. It also lets us excel into failure, which I know is a weird way to say it, but if you're not pressing failure, you're really, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but you've got to see what too much and too little always looks like. And your arousal level is where the voices come from. Am I too excited? Am I underexcited? Am I just right? And we have some really good data that the brain struggles mightily before a task and then it lets go. If it can release, and that's what they're talking about, quieting the mind, and do the action, you become fully present in the moment. There's no longer past or present or future. It's just doing. And for some people, doing is easier. Like we talked about riding a horse, you have to be fully present. You can't be behind or ahead of the horse. You just have to know what the horse is about to do. And that's how our mind is too. And we have to recognize who we are in order to trust ourselves. And we have to have an incredible self image built up that's realistic relative to the training. There's an acronym called SMART uh, that helps us develop goals. And when we're talking about SMART, the big part of it is that the first thing is it has to be a selfless activity. It's a part of our self-image that we're fully present. It has to be measurable. It has to have some sort of accountability to it. It has to be realistic, and it has to be time sensitive. And that allows us to train with the trust because we're working towards something, and then we're refining ourselves as we go along. And even in self-defense, the only constant we have is ourselves. So trust is a huge part of it. Quieting the mind is releasing the struggle.